Paul Simard. I'm an entrepreneur and founder of multiple community organizations, including the Canoe and Humanity.
Can you tell me first about your own mental health journey?
For sure. I think one of the most interesting parts, or the most important parts to start with, really, is that there's no big Hollywood moment in my mental health journey. My mental health journey is exactly that. It's a journey. And I think what I really want people to understand about my mental health journey is that it could be anyone's, and it is far many more people's than we think. I would say that I really started to become aware of my own struggles with mental health and wellness around my early 20s, when I started to feel as though something was passing me by. I wasn't sure what it was, but I felt like I was missing something. I didn't feel like I quite fit. I also recognized that I was over consuming the world with my energy. And what I mean by that is that I never wanted to be stagnant. I never wanted to slow down. I never wanted to stop. It was as if, looking back now, I was constantly seeking some kind of a distraction. I did a lot of things dumb 21-year-olds do, in terms of, consuming way too much alcohol way too often. I wouldn't say that I struggled with it, but I would definitely say that it was a shield. It was part of the things that helped numb the sort of sensory overload that was coming at me. And I was seeking. I was trying to understand myself. I was reading the books. I was listening to the videos. I had the, Anthony Robbins tapes, and because back in the day, that's what they were. They were tapes. And yet nothing seemed to land and nothing seemed to take hold. And I found myself really being very critical about myself as I was trying to figure out who I was and what I was doing in the world. I'd say that I was able to just kind of coast for much of the next 10 to 15 years, which again is not uncommon. And then really things came to a head for me in late 2009. And I found myself, for various reasons, sitting outside of my family home in the middle of the night. It was 11:30, midnight, looking back on my own home, having just come out of a situation where there was a lot of tension exchanged between myself and my children earlier in the evening. And I had raised my voice far more than I should have. And the behavior was completely inappropriate. And I sat there wondering whether they would be better off if I didn't go back in. And it wasn't about just going somewhere else. It was maybe they'd just be better off. If I can't do this, then maybe I shouldn't. Being a father, a husband, and all of those things. And I would say that, again, somehow there was, I view it in this way, Michael, where we kind of all have a baseline of mental health, right? And I feel like I'm fortunate to a certain degree that my baseline is high enough that even in my darker moments, I'm still able to have an awareness of what I would say is what else might be possible, right? That there are options available to me. And so I went back in, and life didn't get better. The relationship struggled. The relationship with my kids struggled, I'd say in particular with my eldest. But I never hit that really dark place in my life, but I also never fully embodied myself. And so there was a lot of numbness. There was a lot of really unhealthy behavior, again, around alcohol and other things. And then in 2017, I quite suddenly lost my job. And the only remnants of anything that might be called my sense of self-worth in the home was taken. I was no longer a protector. I was no longer a provider. We were basically a single income home. And I wasn't doing either of those things. I had never been let go in my life, and it really set me reeling. And my shame and my guilt kind of did, to a certain degree, overwhelm me. But at the same time, raised when I was, I'm a child born in 1971, man up, boys don't cry, all of those things, and definitely don't show your emotions. But I was so full of guilt and shame that I didn't actually tell other than 3 to 4 people outside of family what had happened. I told no one. I went to work every day for 3 weeks, coffee shops, libraries, without a job. But everybody thought I was going to work. And what I was trying to do during that time really was come up with a plan so that it could look like I had some sense of power and control in that moment, which would allow me to have something to hold on to. So that when I did tell people what was happening, I could be the good cisgendered dude and say, don't worry, it's broken, but I got a fix. With the solution in hand, I thought that would somehow make me okay. It would somehow make me whole. And during that time, and this is where I think, I really start to get a better understanding of my own mental health and wellness. During that time, I also started to Google things like, what does it mean to be a husband? What does it mean to be a father? And eventually I got to, what does it even mean to be a man? Because I started to recognize that I didn't even know what that meant. And that's what brought me to men's work, as it's known in the public sphere. And it's where I really started to recognize that, in fact, those times where, and really for much longer than I thought, I had been living with some version of depression for the better part of 20 years. And depression doesn't look like what we think it looks like. We think it looks a certain way with medication and always curled under the sheets or dark rooms. And we have this really strong sort of characterization of what someone living with depression looks like. But living with depression, I was functionally able to move through life. I was not optimizing my life, but I was functional. I had senior positions at universities here. I was getting top roles within companies, but I was also moving out of them very quickly, either by choice or by finding a new opportunity. And my energy levels were dependent on really what was happening in the moment. I was not able to sustain them on their own. I was very much a reflection of what I was feeling in my body, right? And for me, that's what functional depression looks like, right? I had very little joy in life. I forgot how to play with my kids. I forgot how to enjoy quiet moments with my wife at the time. I forgot to be fully present. I forgot how to do all of those things with this layer of depression that was just kind of coated over my life in a way you wouldn't have seen it looking at it. But I'm very aware that it was absolutely there. And I'm just grateful that it didn't ever get to a point where, I needed medication or anything more than, therapy and other things. And I'm grateful for men's work, because I will say absolutely without question, it has made all the difference in my life.
Yeah, with that, what is it like helping other men help their journeys?
Yeah, it's so interesting, as you start to uncover and understand what you have been experiencing in your own life, all of a sudden you start to realize and recognize the same things in others. And I think some of us, and I've always been, I spent 20 years coaching soccer amateur soccer, semi-pro soccer here in Montreal. And as I started to get a sense of what was happening around me, the coach in me kicked in. And I saw an opportunity to be able to lean in and to be a place for men to actually find their own way, imagine their own way through the challenges that they were facing. And I have to say that while I'm so grateful for all of the progress that's been made around mental health generally, and to a certain degree with men, we still have a long way to go. We still have a long way to go. We see a lot of men's movements out there in the world right now, and it's so great to see. And so much of it is still driven on some of the older archetypes of the alpha male, the high performance male that has very specific characteristics. And they're very much, again, performance driven and performance measured. You're supposed to look a certain way. You're supposed to have a certain, career. You're supposed to be able to do a certain number of different things and all of these metrics. And my question always is, how different is that from where we were 50 years ago? And how have we been doing over the last 100 years in terms of how men have been actively, empathetically, compassionately engaging with society, with their families, with individuals, and most importantly, with themselves? Because we often don't fully appreciate the fact that men are 5 times more likely to die by suicide. And that's not because we attempt it more often. The metric was 5 times more likely to die by suicide, not to attempt, but to die by suicide. And part of the reason for that is the violence with which men take on their attempts at suicide. They're not doing it in soft ways. And I mean soft, pills or other things. It's a violent act in the same way that we see violence out in public and, shootings and so on and so forth. They're doing that to themselves as well. And so there's a long, long way to go. And my focus for men is on things that are completely countercultural to a certain degree. I'm inviting men to become stoppable. And what that means is being able to slow everything down so your peripheral vision opens up and you can take more in slowly, and you can hear what people are saying to you. You can hear your children when you slow down. It's not about being stopped or having someone stop you. It's about you becoming stoppable internally so that you have control as to how you show up in the world. So becoming stoppable. Embrace your limits. I know that sounds crazy, but embrace your limits. We're hearing impossible is nothing. Go beyond, all of these different sort of, taglines. And I'm saying, embrace your limits. Embracing your limits means that you have a very deep and clear awareness about who you are and what you're capable of doing. And perhaps most importantly, in whose direction should you be turning to seek help, right? So if I'm not an accountant, why on earth would I try and learn accounting and do all the things and make all these mistakes and then judge myself? Turn in the direction of accountant. It's a silly example, but it's true in so many different ways, and it's applicable in so many different areas of our life. So understanding that, like, embracing your limits is a very healthy way of engaging with the world, and it invites others in, right? So become stoppable, embrace your limits. We have a big push around being vulnerable right now, and I think it's beautiful and I think it's wonderful. And I think a lot of men still would struggle with the idea of being vulnerable because of that connection to quote unquote weakness, right? If I was to ask you to imagine an animal that's vulnerable, you're going to see an animal probably that's wounded, or that is completely overpowered or overmatched by another animal. And that's the kind of resonance that it has with a lot of men still. Not only that, but if we're vulnerable, then we are really only we're only really ready to share what it is that we might be experiencing. But if you're vulnerable, you're not in a position to receive. You're not in a position to be able to support another man. You're not in a position to be able to actually be in relationship with someone else. And so my invitation for men is to actually consider openness instead. Be open. Be open. Be transparent. Be completely there. Own who you are, right? And the beautiful thing about being open, to come to that last point, is that being open means that not only can something come out of me, whatever it is I might need to share, but being open means I can also receive whatever it is you might want to share. It doesn't mean that I'm going to have any answers for you, but at least I'm open for you and I'm here for you. So, and these things, try and translate these things into compelling, powerful, eye-catchy Instagram videos so everybody gets the attention. Really hard to do. The old alpha archetypes, the old king and the warrior, really easy to capture people's attention. Trying to do it with, there's really 4 archetypes. And for anybody who doesn't know, it's king, warrior, magician, lover for the men, the 4 primary archetypes that we talk about. King and the warrior is easy to put out into the world and to have everybody want to aspire to that. The magician and the lover is a little bit more challenging. But these are also the ones that are more inwardly focused. The magician is, how do we talk about ourselves? What words do we use? What spells do we cast? Right? And the lover is, how do we care for ourselves? How do we love ourselves? How do we honor our journey? How do we demonstrate reverence for the simple fact that we're even here, which is insane. It's crazy that we're out here having this conversation together. It's total madness on this device that's recording everything. Like, it's wild, So that's a little bit of what it's like. Obviously, you can tell it's a passion of mine.
Yes.
And I really, my prayer is that more men turn in the direction of other men, because I think the most important thing actually that men can do right now is actually just sit and truly be with other men. There's nothing more powerful for the men I've been with, including myself, than when I spend a day or 2 days or 3 days just being with men. No agenda. We're not trying to accomplish anything. We're not trying to solve any problem. We're just in each other's presence and wondering about each other and being curious and connecting with the land and just really coming right back down to who we are at our very core.
When I was listening to your story, there was a lot of parts in my head like, oh, that happened to me, all that. Mm-hmm. And so is relatability a key for these groups to get together?
So I think it's important to distinguish. The answer is yes and.
Okay.
It's important to make sure that we understand that relatability doesn't mean same, and it also doesn't mean anything that might look like mimicking, right? The goal here isn't to try and be like another man. The goal here is to relate with another man's story so that our story has its place, right? I'm not trying to compete with your story. That's the last thing I want to do. I'm not trying to win that competition, right? But we're socialized to believe we should be. So if winning is always the outcome, then my story, for it to be valid, needs to be either more dramatic or more spectacular than your story, right? So just, as a simple example, although maybe not so, but I was invited to do a TED Talk in 2019 about my journey. when I was looking out in the ecosystem and seeing the people who were having conversations around masculinity and men's mental health, I was like, I was already thinking about, okay, well, how do I make my story such that it would be equal to some of these others that I've heard or seen or been in the presence of, right? And it was actually one of my women friends whose husband died by suicide who told me, no, no, your story is the story that needs to come out. Your story is the one that most men need to hear. Those other stories, that's for the 1%. That other story, that's for another 1%. Your story is going to be able to affect and connect with 70% of men. That's the bulk of men who are numbed to life, potentially, who don't know how to find themselves. This was also coming out of Me Too, where masculinity was being basically, blacklisted in all its forms, right? And so my story, simple as it is, anticlimactic as it might be, is the relatability, is what makes it relatable, is what is compelling to men who might watch it because they're like, oh, wow, yeah, like you said, so much of that was me. But we don't categorize it. Again, if it isn't dramatic, if it isn't spectacular, if it doesn't create some sort of crisis or some kind of massive celebration in the world, if it's not on the extremes, we don't think it's worthy or at least noteworthy. But that's just not true. There's no competition around these things.
And for you as an entrepreneur, how do you fight either burnout or mental health issues?
Such a great question. Such a great question. Because as an entrepreneur, like so many people are actually leaning into today, which is beautiful to see, we have this notion and this idea that, an entrepreneur never sleeps, an entrepreneur never rests. An entrepreneur is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. And it certainly is, and it certainly can be. I think I benefit, and I want to name the benefit first so that it's clear to people. I'm an entrepreneur, yes, but I'm an entrepreneur who has happened to found himself inside of that thing that's called a vocation, right? So it's something close to what Michael Meade, and I'm sure many others have said, is something like my inner genius. And genius is not about intelligence here. It's the thing that's woven into my genes as to what I am called to do, what I am here for. So because I'm so closely engaged with that sense of genius within, I feel at this time, I don't get this same sense of having to push as many entrepreneurs might. So I want to name that because there's a lot of entrepreneurs who don't have necessarily that same blessing, that same opportunity, that same gift. The other thing though, and this is something, again, I think more entrepreneurs have an opportunity to embrace if they choose to, is the notion that a rested body, a rested brain, a rested heart, a rested soul is far more efficient, is far more capable than a soul that goes 24/7, 365 days a year. So you might at the beginning. So let's not say never, but over the long term, if that's what you're here for, and I think most of us are here for what we would call the long game, which is to say our life. If you want to be sustained through that time, play the long game, right? So there may be periods where it's very intense and you feel depleted. But if you, in general, map your life to be something where rest is part of the business plan, where recharging is part of the toolkit that you empower yourself and your team, if you have one with, if quiet and reflection and getting out in nature, if all of these things are woven into your business plan as fundamental parts of your business, then your capacity to have a much healthier relationship with your mental health, with the mental health and wellness of your colleagues and your clients and whatever, is going to be that much better. I'm blessed to have an incredible coach. I'm going to give him a quick call out here for my the physical side of my life, Josh Stark, who's based in New York. And, he gave me 3 things to do every single morning as a way to sort of like make sure that I'm supercharging myself in a very simple way. Very, very simple. Physical side of things, do 3 rounds of push-ups to failure each time, right? So do as many push-ups until you can't. Stop. Do as many push-ups again until you can't. Stop. Do the same thing with hanging, just hanging from a pull bar. Hang as long as you can. And the last one is squats. So do those 3 things in the same way. That's number 1, those 3 things. Get out in the sunshine first thing you can, even if it's not sunny, right? And then the last thing is hydrate. Start your day that way. Every entrepreneur should have time for that. And I'm not saying you have to do it by 5 a.m. And I'm not saying you have to do it by, you don't have to get up at 4, none of that kind of stuff. When you get up, prioritize those things, and it sets the tone for the rest of your day. And every entrepreneur should have that in their business plan. That's my experience. I think that's the other thing I'd say, is that there is no magic bullet. It's really important that we be open to experimentation, to play. I said it. I had lost my capacity to play in my 30s and 40s. I'm getting it back now. And it's bringing back another wave of energy and possibility into my life. It's a tool. Play is a tool. It's a gift that we should be embracing far more often. So it's the same with our self-care. Play with things. Give them time to take hold. Don't just try something once and say it's not for me. Give something a shot and give it its chance to take hold. And design your mental health and wellness, physical health and wellness protocol, the one that works for you, the one that you enjoy doing. If you don't enjoy doing it, it's going to be really hard to sustain.
What do you do to help your own mental health?
There's one is those things I mentioned. That's a priority for me. That starts my day. I can tell you when I don't do that in the morning, my day's different. The other thing that affects my day big time is if I don't start my day with reading at my favorite coffee shop, without my laptop, without my phone, it also affects my day. So picking up a book, poetry, philosophy, whatever it is you're into, and I take an hour or so and I enjoy a coffee out in public and community, the bright sunshine. It's amazing. So that's number 2. Number 3, and this one's only come up in like the last 2 years, but it's underestimated, is connecting with other men, connecting with other people, building an intentional community of men. I was called out by a friend, called in. I was called in by a friend to deepen my relationship with other men. Even though I was working with them, it wasn't, they weren't friends. They were clients, right? So can I develop friendships with men? And since I've been doing that for about a year and a half, that has been a huge, 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 huge injection of wellness. And I would say the last thing is around my kids. And I mean, not everybody has kids, and that's to be acknowledged, and that's fine. But I spend a lot more intentional time with my 2 girls, who are 16 and 21. So it's really hard to do as a dad to get their attention. But when I do, I make sure that I'm there with them, and as much as possible that we have fun.
And you talked a little bit about it, the great work you're doing, but where do you want to see your mission in the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
It's a great question. And, there's this, obviously I would love to be helping more men, and I would love to be helping more people and more families. But I think at the end of the day, one of the things that I've tried to do is not spend too much time thinking too far ahead. And I'll tell you why for myself. I mean, I have ideas as to what I would like, but the world is changing so fast. Things are moving so quickly. Even the words we use, the language, when you think about all the different changes we've seen around gender and all of those things, I'm really someone who, when a man works with me, I don't have a 12-week program. They work with me and we work together in the moment to moment of their life, in their moment to moment of their experience. Of course, drawing from the past and with an idea of what they'd like to accomplish. But it really is contained as much as possible in this thing that we call the present, right? So I try to do the same for myself. I try to do the same. I want to embody what it is that I'm encouraging others to do, because I think it's really important that my own energy, my own mind, my own way of seeing the world be very much in this moment. That I don't want to think too much about the future because I don't know what it's going to look like. No one would have predicted Me Too to the extent that we saw it. As an example, nobody would predict what we're seeing right now in the world, right? I mean, it's intense. And how do you plan for 3 years from now, or how do you envision 3 years from now when it's so difficult to actually envision next week, right? So I have dreams, I have aspirations. Here's what I would love to see as a general thing. I want to see a generation of young men who know how to stand shoulder to shoulder with my daughters. If they can do that, because my daughters are going to kick ass and take names, and it's going to take a special kind of man to be able to stand next to them. And I've already seen some come into one of my daughter's life who just can't hold their space. They don't know how to do it. And I want to see young men know who they are, have a strong sense of self, be compassionate and understanding and empathetic and loving and caring and considerate around their female partners, but also be strong next to them. That's what I want. But that's as narrow a field as you're going to get from me, and it's not narrow at all. I acknowledge it.
How can people reach out to you and learn more?
Well, the best thing to do is paulsimard.co. I've got my website. I have 3 or 4 actual different tracks of offerings that I have for people. Not all of them are limited to men. And so they can find me there. That's the easiest thing. And from there, you'll find me on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm very open about how to communicate with me. So my phone number's on the website. I'm super accessible. And, I think that's one of the things that I really pride myself on is very early. I got coached, I got taught, I got supported in being open and accessible. And I want to be as much of that as possible for any man who might resonate with our conversation or anything I might have to say, and to feel, I was going to say safe, and I guess I will say it. I have challenges around the word, and feel safe enough to reach out and put their hand up.